Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Norway House. It's always a great pleasure to cooperate with science business. We've done it numerous times in the past, and I hope that we can keep up the pace in the future. Science business always has this ability to raise issues that relates to true challenges in the marketplace. This time it's about entrepreneurship and how the European Union can develop itself to promote the creativity and the innovation that's linked to small and medium-sized enterprises and to startups. In tabloid fashion, to a small and medium-sized enterprise, the market is exciting and the regulatory framework is complicated. Now, what should the European Union do? It's about Single Market Act 1, it's about Single Market Act 2, it's about new rules and regulations for government procurement, it's about funds, it's about access to finance. It's truly a fascinating topic. Well, I will leave you in the best of hands. I will leave you in the hands of Richard Hudson, President of Science Business Innovation Board. Richard, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Well, welcome all of you. This is a meeting of the Science Business Innovation Board. Our purpose is to highlight and to study issues of importance for innovation policy and the environment for innovation in Europe. As the Ambassador said, the subject is entrepreneurship. We're going to look at two specific areas. There are many things that the EU is doing in relation to entrepreneurship, but two in particular is one is a program that they are hoping, planning, maybe they can launch if the council ultimately permits it, called COSME, a competitiveness program for small and medium-sized enterprise companies. To talk about that, we have Antti Peltomäki. He's the Deputy Director General for Enterprise and Industry at the European Commission. Thank you very much for joining us. Another topic, and we will actually begin with this, is to what extent can public procurement be used as a tool to stimulate entrepreneurship and to help small companies grow? To talk about that, we have Malcolm Harbour, who is the chairman of the Internal Markets Committee in the European Parliament, and this has been an issue that Malcolm has been championing in Brussels and across the EU for many years, actually. So there is some progress in it now. Virtue pays off, Malcolm. We also have to discuss this Daniela Coutu. She is an entrepreneur with a Portuguese company called Cell2B in cell therapy. She has, well, you can talk about your perspective on these EU programs. Beside her is Tor Land. He is the director for the Eco-Imagination program in EMEA for General Electric. Beside him is Tuula Thierry. She is the president of Aalto University. And the last guest with us is Soa Balzoneka. She is the director for audience marketing at Microsoft. Very many different perspectives on small business. We will be taking questions from the internet and from you as we proceed. And we will conclude with a discussion of the broader issue of support for innovation in Europe. So, Malcolm, let me begin with you first. Why procurement? What's that got to do with little companies?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Can I just apologize to your audience to say that I have to leave in about 10 minutes, and that's because at this time of year, we have a whole pack of dossiers building up to be negotiated. And a key one for all of you is how to enforce your rights under intellectual property using the power of customs. And the presidency, you know, we change every 6 months. The Cyprus government wants to get all its dossiers done. So I'm afraid that one thing I have to chair is that negotiation. Now, on to the core topic for today. Well, first of all, I'm really pleased now that in the Enterprise Union, as you were calling for, and the Innovation Union, that the use of public procurement is now becoming a mainstream policy. It's really good that DG Enterprise and Industry, for example, is now supporting programs through its competitiveness and innovation program to bring potential customers and buyers together, and to say to the customers, look, you have to be thinking in a much more challenging way about what's coming towards you in the future. How are you going to employ innovations in information technology, in transport, in energy saving, in housing, in systems, to deliver better services to your customers, better value at a lower cost? You can't just do things like you did before, and we have the answers. And so what we can do is to bring them together. And that partnership relationship is great for the entrepreneurial company with a great idea, because they will have a customer that, first of all, will help them to specify the idea for the marketplace. Secondly, help them to develop it, because all public organizations generally have large-scale possibilities for testing. Look at hospitals, for example. If you're a medical device innovator, if you can go and prove it out in a hospital. An interesting project we have in England at the moment with the fire brigade, who have ideas about equipment that they want with modern technology. You can test it live and then prove it and then get it into the marketplace. And then the final linkage, I would say, Richard, is about risk. Because the big problem we're facing at the moment is a whole recalibration of financiers about risk. And we know banks are becoming more risk averse for reasons we understand. Now, if you are an inventor who's working with that public customer, that's a much less risky proposition and should make you much more attractive to get that next tranche of funding that you may want to come in to prove that concept, to ramp it up again. So all of these things together mean that public procurement has immense power, but we have to make sure that the legal framework is simple, it's easy to operate, it doesn't deter people, that the legal frame we put in encourages good, innovative procurement and does not act to discourage it.
Malcolm, is there a target for, I think it's something like 17 billion a year in procurement that happens. How much of this is realistically could be talked about for small companies?
Well, I think it's early days to set those targets. First of all, we have to get the concept established. But all I would say is that if you think about how much is spent in public procurement, and I think in times of economic slowdown in consumer markets, it's going up. So it's nearly 20% of Europe's GDP goes on public procurement. Now, frankly, if I was setting targets, I only want, if I have 1% of that, that's a huge amount of extra money going into innovation. So the potential is fantastic. But actually what we need to do is to get the authorities, the customers themselves, to realize that this is part of their remit. Because it's counterintuitive, I would say, in times of recession, not to buy on the lowest price, if that makes sense. There's the pressure is, you can imagine, the buyers are being brought into the Chief Executive's office and saying, this is the government grant is going down by 20 million this year. How many savings can you deliver me in the procurement budget? And so that's the problem. But actually, we want them also at this time to be thinking about different ways of doing things that will really pay off in the longer term.
So the catalytic function that you can play, that the European institutions can play, is what here? Isn't this ultimately a matter just for the member states?
Well, I think first of all, we can get the legal framework right.
What's the problem with it now?
Well, at the moment, it doesn't actually encourage that sort of partnership procurement over an extended period, where you may need to review and reset the terms of the contract as the invention develops. You don't necessarily know what the final price will be, and so that's going to be a partnership. But public companies have been doing this for years. It's regarded as best practice in public procurement, in private companies, to work with a supplier to develop a part for a car or for a generator or whatever it is. So why shouldn't that apply in public procurement? That's the first thing. The second thing, I think that the way that we're deploying now some of our research and innovation funds and the Competitiveness and Innovation Programme is that we're putting some funding in to help bring those partners together. And the European Institute of Technology, I think, has a really crucial role to play here, because that's about bringing together researchers, entrepreneurs, business, and problems, and finding ways together to solve them. Now, what could be a better university, if you like, of getting in the public customers to talk to providers about that? In my own region, we had a big meeting in Birmingham last week where we're involved both with the EIT, our city council is just starting to work with Barcelona and with Eindhoven. We're hoping to develop this whole network And that will then act as the catalyst by bringing people together.
Daniela, could I just ask you very briefly, public procurement, you're a cell therapy company. The procurer, I suppose, would be the health administrations in the end. Would this be useful?
Yes. So I was listening about risk perception, and the way I see we can diminish or decrease risk perception and effective risk is by EIT as a lack, in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, EIT as a severe or a serious limitation, which is for places that have not developed their ecosystem strongly, they will still lack the infrastructure to put EIT to work. So that will be giving more to the places that have more already, and that's a serious limitation that we have to overcome for EIT. When regarding the question, the way I see we can diminish risk perception is by bringing together, again, people with long expertise. And how can we attract this kind of people with very long expertise that have set their own business, then went to work in big corporations? How can we attract them back together to start up companies? What are the incentives these people have to come back? So I've been studying. I think it's a different culture that we need. Can we incentive people to really make that step forward in a stage in their life that makes sense to get back? And just one second topic.
Well, hold on. Let me come to that for just a minute. Wait a minute.
Sure.
But Malcolm, the issue here though is there has been talk about improving this procurement system for some years. What gives you confidence that it's going to happen now?
Well, because I think, in a way, it's an idea whose time has come, because we're searching for ways at the moment to make innovative-based entrepreneurial companies really grow very quickly. And we're also doing it at a time, as I said, where markets are weaker, where risk is being reassessed by lenders. And given the amount we're spending on public procurement, I think we can move it forward. We're getting it right into the perception of decision makers in public authorities. And I also think that our electors also expect public authorities to do better in deploying innovation to solve problems. Because people are using great tools all the time, particularly in information technology and communications, and they're increasingly intolerant of the fact that if they want to relate to their local government, if they want to get renew their work permit, license their car, move house or whatever, they find that the public authority systems are terribly old-fashioned, very clunky, they don't get the information they want. And they're saying, well, why aren't you deploying new innovations? And they're saying that to politicians. Why aren't you deploying new innovations to improve the recycling of waste and tackling climate change, improving urban transport? You know, because we can see the technologies there. So that, I think, is part of the politics of it. Because traditionally politicians are very risk-averse about what they do in local authorities, understandably. But actually, I think we're just on the cusp of a change now. And I think particularly in the medical field, we see now that people see innovations, they see cures coming in different countries, and they're going to their local health authorities and they're saying, well, why can't we have this therapy here in my region to help me with my condition? Because somebody over there has it. And now that we have more cross-border movement of patients as well, I think in health we're going to see some really big changes coming up.
Mm-hmm. There is, I think, as you mentioned, in some member states, there's already been some pilot programs and efforts to get this going. It's also in the US, of course, but that's more in the military context.
Well, it's not just, actually. I mean, what's happened in the US, well, you probably know better than I do, but I mean, from the work we've seen and done on the US, there's been some important comparative studies done on the US, which are available from Cambridge University, if anybody's interested. Professor David Connell there has done studies which have been very influential. It started originally in the defense community, it's true, and the US Defense Department put a lot of money in to help SMEs. But now every single US government authority, agency, I think, I'm not sure exactly what level it goes to, has to set aside part of their procurement budget to procure innovation from SMEs. And that is ongoing now, and that's something that has been talked about at a European level, and that might well be the next stage, to have some targets on the table like we have for investment in innovation generally.
Okay, but you have to go chair the committee meeting.
Yeah.
Before you do, can you take one question?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Question, comment. And who would like to go on the subject of procurement?
You can email, but
Yes,
you can email them
please,
to me later
please.
also.
Wait for the microphone
Yeah.
and
I'm happy to
say who you are.
I'm happy to accept your questions by email. Science Business will know how to find us. But we're on the web also.
You mentioned earlier.
You are?
I'm Rick Henschel. I'm a partner at Foley & Lardner, a U.S. firm. I'm a patent attorney with an interest in intellectual property. But on the point of procurement, you mentioned in an earlier meeting retaining IP rights as a way of promoting this. And in what you're describing in terms of the U.S. experience of things being driven by spending from the armed forces, I'm wondering to what extent you're using the U.S. model, in particular the Bayh-Dole Act, to develop an approach in Europe.
Well, I think we've looked at the thinking behind the US model. I would say it's not exactly the same method of replicating it, because all the procurement structures are very different. But I think the whole idea of using some of that public funding to go in to develop and encourage companies to take and bring these innovations to market. I mean, this is the crucial thing. It's about taking ideas and making them deployable and ready in the marketplace. And intellectual property is certainly one of the levers you can use for that in terms of making it more attractive to a purchasing authority. The lead customer model, where the lead customer may get royalty-free access to an innovation for a period of time, but the company can then go and sell that innovation to a second and third and hopefully a global audience. And I think there are there's plenty of case studies in the US, primarily I would say from defense-related innovations, but others as well, that show what can be done. So I think we need to be working on that. But one other thing I would say that we haven't talked about, which in a way is a sort of public encouragement of public procurement. I mean, I think there is a role, a very selective and targeted role, for more of the type of technology challenges that the US has been rather good at up to now. So we've had the driverless vehicle challenge, for example, where, with a very large prize at the end, it's encouraged people to come and develop new technologies for driverless vehicles. And I think there are lots of other challenges, and that's something that I think we could, at a European level, look for some one or two grand societal challenges where we can have a prize for that, which is attractive enough to really attract people there. And also, it will engage the public. It will make people excited and wanting to be able to support innovation.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Malcolm, for joining us. You have to go chair the meeting, so when you like, go ahead. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
For those of you watching online, this is the life in Brussels. Meetings come up at the last minute, particularly at the end of the year. Antti, if I could turn to you next. So you're with DG Enterprise and Industry. What on earth is COSME?
Good question.
And yet another Brussels acronym.
Perhaps I think that before trying to answer what is COSME, but I think that perhaps trying to put in a wider context and then perhaps it's up to you and an audience to really test that how really fit for the purpose that kind of a program is, funding program in simple terms. But of course, I think that when we are now, I think, facing kind of a final negotiations on multi-annual financial framework, and of course, I think we are having big care blocks on competitiveness and cohesion and agriculture. Of course, we all hope that I think that there are money left for the competitiveness, that not only the friends of the common agricultural policy and common kind of cohesion policy are really, I think, that dominating in a way that I think that whatever has been proposed by Commission is reduced, where we are then starting to ask ourselves whether we are still having money for all these kind of programs to boost European competitiveness. But all in all, I think that's in the hands of heads of state or government, and I think that perhaps it's not very much now up to me to decide how we defend, I think, that our proposal. But I think that originally, I think, of course, these funding instruments that we have been proposing are very much kind of implementation of the EU 2020 strategy, which is smart, sustainable, inclusive growth. And of course, it's based on 7 flagship initiatives, and I think that in terms of the COSME, I guess that you can see kind of linkages for industrial policy. You can see that, I think, very much in linkage to digital agenda as well as the innovation union. And I think then comes the question of perhaps where are the SMEs, small and medium-sized companies. And of course, I think that we used to have kind of a program of competitiveness and innovation program where I think we had kind of a financing instruments for giving certain kind of access to risk capital as well as the loan guarantees. And I think then support for different kind of a more focused type of the internationalization of the SMEs or helping them to grow up or networking. And I think that was part of this kind of old or still existing program of competitiveness and innovation. And I think now this kind of competitiveness and innovation in the new design of the next financial period is those innovation and research type of the activities are part of the Horizon 2020, and there are kind of a target figure for SME participation in there as well.
I think that's what, 15%?
Yeah.
So 15% of the 80 billion.
Thanks to Malcolm, I think the MEPs have been very much, I think, raising the level to 20%, but of course...
20%.
Yeah, but okay. Everything is open, and of course this is still the kind of a final negotiations, but all in all, I think there is a kind of our basic proposal was that whenever the SMEs are looking for the support of their research and innovation type of the activities, they are getting the access to Horizon 2020 funding, where I think that you are having the similar type of the funding instruments on loan guarantees as well as the equity risk capital available for them whenever they are trying really to get close to the market type of the phase of their innovation projects. And then COSME is very much of trying to help the companies to grow, not only based on the innovation, but I think really have that kind of funding available for them whenever they are ready to take kind of next steps to grow, reach internal market, reach the global market. And I think there is a kind of funding instruments available, plus then kind of networks that we are providing them, that they are, let's say, having kind of a support for all different kind of European level activities.
Okay, but wait, let me interrupt you for a second. COSME, what does it stand for?
Competitiveness of enterprises, especially SMEs.
Competitiveness of enterprises for SMEs.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think when Vice President Tajani announced it, he also said he associated the name with Cosimo de' Medici. Is that right?
I guess so, that you are right, yeah.
At the press briefing when this was announced, he said that he cited de' Medici as having been an example of an entrepreneur. In case you didn't know, Vice President Tajani is Italian. So. But please, but how much money?
2.5 billion was our original proposal, and it's still our offer, and I think then it's up to member states and parliament to bargain that what is left when I think that the final deal is done.
Okay, and if I'm a little company, how do I get the money? Not all 2.5 billion, but...
I think that especially the kind of the funding side is kind of a loan guarantees, and I think that and as well as kind of a venture capital, they are managed by European Investment Bank, and I think then it's kind of their kind of ways of really making them kind of open for all SMEs. I think that what we had in the SIP program, I think that we had kind of something like 200,000 SMEs getting the financing out of these type of the funding instruments through EIB.
Yeah, and for then your target for COSME is bigger or the same?
We try, of course, I think our proposal is that we are increasing the kind of amount that it's, I think that 1.5 billion is for these, let's say, new financial instruments. And I think that, of course, if we take the kind of a leveraging effect that we expect that €1 spent on loan guarantees is generating €30 of private money. And of course, I think that is then having the impact.
So these financial instruments, again, are basically I can go to the European Investment Bank and say, I want a loan guarantee. Is that?
In simple terms, yes.
Yes. But of course, will they say yes? I mean, how difficult is it going to be?
Okay, I think that whole of the multi-annual financial framework, and I think that all the kind of instruments, kind of one leading idea is that we try to make them much simpler than they used to be. Of course, I think that whatever is, I think that then the final outcome, I guess that there are many who are complaining that it's still very complicated and heavy procedures, but I think that still we try to make our best, and I think then it's very much a question that I think that the whole of the co-legislation process, where I think that we are then defining the rules for the participation, etc. It's in the hands of Malcolm and member states and the council, and of course we have our proposals in there, and we have tried really to make sure that I think that they are at least much simpler than they are today.
Okay, and you said, well, that was 1.5 was the financial instruments that you were referring to, and the remainder of the 2.5?
I think then that's, we are having a Europe Enterprise Network, which is kind of a support. They are having 600 offices around Europe, and I think they are supposed to be that kind of where the SMEs can go and then ask how to do what you were just asking me to do, that how to reach those EIB loans, and then I think that, or any other type of things. And then we are having kind of dedicated programs where I think that we try to, I think, help out certain kind of, let's say, not in terms of the money, but I think that being part of the networks going out, especially I think that the internationalization type of the activities where we try to help them finding certain type of knowledge and information that how, and I think that we are having also kind of support structures in third countries like China, India, etc. So that I think we try to have certain kind of structures in place.
Okay. One more question for you before we broaden the discussion. But perhaps could we? What is the address for those who would like to send a question in? Marilyn.
The address is live@sciencebusinessinoneword.net. live@sciencebusiness.net.
And is there a hashtag also? Of course there is.
That is Entrepreneurship Union. That's the hash.
#Entrepreneurship Union. Okay. Is that an editorial comment or what? All right. Okay. But Antti, a last question for you. Why are SMEs so politically popular?
If you are looking at what is their share of the European companies, it's 99 point something. If you are looking at what is kind of their share of the kind of private sector employment, it's 2/3 of the all kind of private sector employees are working for SMEs and not big companies. And I think then if you are looking at what type of the companies have been able to provide new jobs in the last 3 years, it's the SMEs mainly. I think 85% of the new jobs are created by SMEs. And of course we hope that one day one of these or two or several of these SMEs are really ready to grow and then become big global players. And I think that it's not that it's only that we are having Microsoft always on my left-hand side and someone from Europe on right-hand side, and I think that we should really much like to see the kind of success stories that are really becoming big, dominant players on the global market. And of course I think that perhaps it's kind of coming from Portugal.
Okay. But if you're talking about SMEs, what realistically speaking, what can a European institution do about that? Isn't that really more a matter of, local tax policy, local regulation? What can you do?
Of course, I think that we have recognized it's kind of a framework conditions for any type of the businesses, whether they are favorable or. That's why I think that we are having also so-called Small Business Act, where we have tried really to understand that what type of the legislation is either beneficial or really hampering the kind of SMEs life. And of course, I think that we have now public consultations where we are asking SMEs to identify the 10 most burdensome piece of legislation having in place, either coming from the Europe or on a national basis, and try to really to understand and what type of the administrative burden or regulatory burden is this on SMEs, and to really then reflect back whenever we are streamlining, simplifying the European legislation. We are having so-called smart regulation. It's very much, I think, that kind of pushed by President Barroso, and I think that our colleagues in SecGen, and of course we are fully in line with that kind of approach, that we try to assess and make certain kind of fitness checks of already existing legislation, that whether it's really serving the purpose like it originally was meant to be, or is it cumulative effect of all different kind of legislations leading to certain kind of a totally undesired situation for the business sector.
All right, okay. Well, we'll take questions and comments shortly on this, but first, Daniel, I'm going to pick on you again. So you've heard discussion of two different things going on in Europe, in the European institutions. One is promoting the use of procurement across the EU as a tool to support SMEs, and the other, this more classical COSME kind of program to provide direct support through the EIB or through other means. I mean, what is the? Did you have a hard time getting started? What was your story?
Okay, so let me share a little bit of our story with you. Yeah. You already know, but so CELTB was born during our work at both MIT and IST in Lisbon. We are 4 founders. We developed a new cell-based therapy, and we treated 6 patients with severe signs of GVHD. GVHD is a disease that occurs when a patient has leukemia, for instance, it's an example only, and it's a bone marrow transplant. Sometimes that bone marrow transplant rejects the body. That's why it's called graft versus host. And in the most severe cases, the mortality rate is 95%. So grade 4 GVHD has a 95% chance of dying. And we treated 6 out of 6 patients. It was a big success, and this was...
That is, they all survived.
They all survived,
yes. Thank you.
From 6 out of 6 means that all of them survived, and that happened between 2007 and 2009, when new legislation came out to regulate this cell-based therapy not as a transplant, but as a drug. So we stopped then. We were PhDs back then, and we decided we have to move this forward because we have seen the results, and they're pretty fantastic. So we decided to do it as a company, otherwise we wouldn't have the money needed to go through clinical trials, as this is a drug. In 2010, that new legislation that came in from the EU was translated into Portugal, and we decided to move forward in a different way. We finished our PhDs back in 2011, and we started the company in 2011. Since then, we closed the seed round from 3 nationalities, 3 investors from different nationalities, Portugal, Spain, and the US. We decided, one key aspect is that we decided to start the company in Europe, not in Boston. A biotech company, we decided to start it in Europe, not in Boston, because the regulatory framework is much more flexible, not easier, more flexible in Europe for advanced therapies.
More flexible in Europe?
Yes, so I was listening to, and my bells were ringing like, it's not the case for everything. It's much more flexible for advanced therapies, and we are talking with the European Medicine Agency. We are now applying for orphan designation, and we are starting the advisor and mentorship for our clinical trial, and it's completely different. We can do it faster, more efficiently, and with less patients, and say it's safe and efficient for a large population than have marketing approval. So this is a very positive aspect and led us to start the company in Europe. I've talked with other companies, American companies, at least I know 2 of them. There are not that many in cell-based therapies. And they started their clinical trials in the US, and they are moving to Europe to do their clinical trials because we have a more flexible pathway. So not everything is negative. This is a very positive aspect. The only negative aspect I found in this whole regulatory process is once it's approved, we do not have a unified system that allows us to move forward and distribute it right ahead, since we have marketing approval from the European Union. We have to go from country to country in which we want or we aim to sell and have local authorization after the more general one. So if we can change that, that will be fantastic, and I'll guess that a lot more companies will come from the States and start their own business in Europe first.
Well, Mr. Peltomaki, Antti, this is an opportunity then for the Commission, I suppose.
Ready to consider, definitely.
You've considered it.
Yeah.
Can it happen?
Yeah, of course, this is exactly the field, perhaps where my DG doesn't have the competence, but of course I think that's very much on the kind of for healthcare issues where, of course, I think that we are having very sensitive field vis-a-vis our member states, but of course I think that in terms of the internal market, I guess that personally I would say that I would very much like to push it through.
So this is kind of like a little case study in how EU action on regulation can actually make a difference. It's not a question of funding from the EU. It's purely coordination of a particularly important area of regulation. Yeah. Okay. All right. So does any of that translate into a broader suggestion, perhaps? Do you think? I mean, that's your little area, your area of industry.
Yes, but if that happens in a tiny area such as regenerative medicine, and then it's translated into drugs and pharmaceuticals, drugs and medical devices, that will be, again, fantastic, and it's a much more broader area. So it's a large sector. One other aspect that I found it should be unified is someone asked a moment ago about IP rights. If we have a system, a legal system that's unified all over Europe, that will facilitate much more investment in European companies, especially if it's a system that VC-based firms, US VC-based firms can understand. But if it's a system that's completely different, but it's a single one, then it's much easier to invest in Spain, in Portugal, in Greece, in Finland, than to study a system and go to court in a completely different way in each country. That will make it a lot easier, and that is across areas.
Okay. Tula, I'm going to come to you next. Now, Aalto University is, well, the history is it's from the merger of three formerly separate educational institutions in Helsinki. And I think, 5 years ago, was it? 2003? 3 years. 3 years ago. Time flies. But already what's unusual about Aalto is the emphasis that you've put on entrepreneurship. So as you've heard this discussion, do you have any reflections? And do you have a suggestion on what the EU could do?
It's a little bit different angle to this entrepreneurship, because actually what universities are for, it's research and education. And what is increasingly wanted from universities is that the research, maybe in connection with education, would lead into startup activities. So we are in the very early end of the SME scene. And what we've actually found is that the first important thing in boosting the entrepreneurship was an attitude change, to sort of voice actually, and this was the very beginning of Aalto University, that, it was first called the Innovation University. And it was a very explicitly voiced demand that we should encourage entrepreneurship. And that gave to the students actually an idea that, in addition to a career in the public sector or in the big international companies or Finnish companies or whatever, actually entrepreneurship was also a career choice. And they very hungrily actually jumped on this possibility. And our experience from what is the best feed for entrepreneurship is actually to give a lot of, to sort of find good ideas, not try to order, kind of, not to say that we would need a solution to this, but to say that, we are ready to support any good ideas that you have, provided that you think that it's commercially viable. And just to have this kind of, universities are by definition bottom-up organizations. We try to make sure that we have the best people as professors and the best students as our students. And in that way, so there's a huge kind of undergrowth of ideas. And the question is, how do you then, how do you find funding for this kind of things? And the very well recognized problem in Europe is that there is very few venture capitalists around. And so we are kind of relying on public funding or the few venture capitalists that we have, but it's difficult to find them because they're so few. And then we come up, to think that, okay, how could we find funding models? And there is kind of like ideas like crowdfunding or something like that, which I think actually we should really very strongly try to encourage, the kind of, and that's in a way a bottom-up initiative as well, that you gather a group of people who are interested in this idea, who are willing to put the money and also carry the risk. And my worry about this kind of, I think it's actually a very good idea to think about how you could kind of use the public procurement as a mechanism to boost, these kind of initiatives where there is already a market demand, but it does not address the bottom-up ideas, which usually, I mean, if they are research-based or student-initiated, oftentimes, that's where you find the radical innovations, which are fast, they are paradigm-changing, and these kind of mechanisms that we're talking about at the EU level, they are far too slow for financing this kind of ideas.
So in Aalto then, you said it's bottom up, the ideas that come from the students. Yeah. So you don't sit there in the administration saying, I would like 5 spin-out proposals on climate change technology.
No, we basically take all of them, which we can get hold of, And the thing is, I mean, what we have found actually, even with the generation, the founding of the whole university, is that we actually work with the good ideas that rise from bottom up. And so far we're actually doing pretty well, We're not giving an idea to the professors that, okay, this is how you build an innovation university. But we try to identify good ideas and then we support them, and let them do what they want, This is how the whole ecosystem for small startups was actually founded, that there was one professor with the course on product development where the ideas came from the industries and the work was done by the students. And we didn't ask money from the industries, but we asked their involvement. So we asked, can we get one of your researchers to participate in this project? And then there started to come new ideas for the companies to commercialize, or if they didn't want to do that, for the students to start things themselves, And the way this actually started was that they needed a space for this course, and we lent them the keys, and they never returned the keys. So now we have this fantastic platform, where the students and the companies and all kinds of people can work together on these practical, really hands-on. And what we see is that it's true that we don't have a lot of venture capital in Finland, but suddenly all those entrepreneurs who have left Finland because the legislation wasn't really very supportive for entrepreneurship, they are suddenly coming back because there is this enthusiasm and passion, and a lot of young entrepreneurs, who are burning to get their companies to work. And now they are acting as coaches free of charge, but of course in the back of their mind they have an idea that, when they pick the winners they will invest, and then it's kind of a win-win. So you need to be able to create some sense of freedom and kind of like, there are things which you can do top down, and I think this procurement thing might be a good thing to do exactly for that kind of thing.
And on the
but you shouldn't lose.
And on the crowdsourcing, what can the EU do about that?
Well, to harmonize the legislation and make it allowed and make it acceptable and desirable.
That's a question of securities regulation in 27 member states, isn't it?
I know.
Isn't that impossible?
Well, that is not for me to answer.
Antti, is there? I mean, I know there has been much discussion in other parts of the Commission, but probably also in DG Enterprise about this issue of crowdsourcing funding. I mean, is there anything that the EU institutions can do about this, or do you just have to throw up your hands and say, well, that's for the member states?
Of course, I think we try to cover and understand the kind of all kind of new types and forms of how we can support. But of course, I think that perhaps at the moment, I think that we are clearly trying to identify that where I think that we are the best. What are kind of how to channel the kind of European, let's say, budget funds. And I think that are we the best placed to this kind of a crowdsourcing? Of course, then comes the question that is there something really in terms of legislation that prevents use of these kind of things? Of course, and then it's very much up to my colleagues in DG Market to think that what kind of financial, let's say, services, what type of hurdles there might be.
Okay, all right. Tor, I'll come to you next, but before that, is there a question, Marilyn, from the internet?
Can you hear
louder.
me? Yeah, now. There is a question from a small Polish SME called Cosmonauta, active in the area of space technology and consulting. The question is there any idea of how to increase the visibility and chances of new EU member states access to Horizon 2020 projects and other initiatives? And the second question, are there going to be any dedicated project to high-tech SMEs established in new EU member states?
Antti.
Of course, I think that,
what are you doing for the new member states? Is ultimately
yeah, of course, I think that that's definitely one of the issues that we have recognized in Framework Program 7, that of course I think that there has been kind of expectations that new member states are catching up of the old ones, that I think they would start really to get their, let's say, their share of the kind of public funds for promoting research and innovation. But that has been very slow. Of course, there has been question that should we start to define some other criteria for funding except excellence. Of course, now I think the kind of perhaps where we are looking at what can be done with the structural funds, and I think kind of a smart specialization, that where I think that the regions would very much look at where they are having the strengths, and that these kind of funds can be, I think, that be used very much in the same direction as perhaps the research and innovation funding.
Just for clarity's sake, for those of you who don't know all the Brussels terms, structural funds, you're referring to a separate pot of money that is used by the member states for, in essence, development.
Yeah, I think the regional development, and of course I think that all the new member states are very much of, I think, getting throughout the whole of the country. I think like in question of Poland, I guess that there are a lot of public kind of possibilities, and I think these have now been very much bottom up. It has been the regions together with the national governments to be responsible for the programming, what type of the projects they are. And I think that has been a bit of the question that whether they prefer to put money in the roads or kind of new SMEs. And I think that it hasn't been that we are imposing something on them, but perhaps this kind of a new framework is very much, we try to align and streamline of whatever we are doing, let's say Horizon 2020. We hope that there is certain kind of actions done by the structural funds that are supporting, and I think that especially the kind of a capacity building, and I think that you are investing in human capital, not only a kind of a physical capital.
Okay, Tula, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just about this, where this small startup from Poland should go. The thing is that, when you have well-functioning innovation platforms, they're actually open to everyone. And the platform that our students have started, it's called the Startup Sauna, because we are from Finland. And there is a competition for typically several at least 100 different startup ideas being screened by these serial entrepreneurs that are the coaches for this activity. And the best ones will get to come to a course or a kind of a piloting phase of starting up, no matter where they come from. This is currently financed by Aalto University. There's a foundation being built, with Finnish funding and so forth, So the Polish company would be very welcome to the Startup Sauna. But my message really is that, what maybe the EU should be doing is to identify these kind of active hubs for entrepreneurship and then provide support for them to become pan-European, for instance. But I think it's really important to see where the life is, where the activities are, and then try to build on them. You can't have all of the activities top-down. You have to also consider the bottom-up initiatives.
Okay. Tor, from GE's perspective, I mean, you yourself came from a startup before you went to, well, it's been, what, 100 years or more since GE was a startup. But so what's your perspective on what the EU could actually do for entrepreneurship?
Well, which you see from a commercial perspective, GE has a strong interest in a very dynamic startup group to partner with, because we look at startups as the partners, potential partners for technology development, for commercial development, for scaling. So we have a very strong interest in having a large group of successful startups to partner with globally. We actually put in place a $200 million investment program to partner with these startups. But quite frankly, I have to say that most of the investment, more than $140 million so far, actually went to US-based startups. So if I try to draw a comparison between Europe and the US, a couple of things are quite...
If I could ask you, so why did it end up that way? Was it simply that's where the ideas came from?
Well, first of all, you obviously always want to invest into the best possible partner and startup. And in certain segments, it's just a fact of life that the best and most dynamic partners or startup companies you find in the US, in particular in the energy sector, where we naturally have been focusing. But I mean, if you look at the reason for this, what is the reason for this? I mean, first of all, it's availability of venture capital as a general theme. On average, over the last couple of years in the US, the venture capital industry there invested around $20 billion into startup companies every year. The corresponding number for Europe is $4 billion. And this, considering that the GDP of the European Union is actually bigger than the GDP of the US. So there's clearly a mismatch. Secondly, there's a lot of red tape in Europe that you don't have in the same form in the US, in particular around mutual recognition of qualifications, lack of common standards. Standards in France are different than in Germany. That makes it very difficult for startup companies to really participate from what is supposed to be a common market. And last but not least, a big theme of growing startups and having a vibrant startup community is the ability and the right to fail. Because we still have to be mindful of the fact that most startup companies actually fail. And we have to come to a point in Europe where the failure of a startup company is, first of all, sometimes looked upon from a system perspective actually a success, and doesn't have any kind of long-lasting damaging consequences either for the investor or for management, for example, as far as liability from a bankruptcy procedure is concerned. These are really big elements which distinguish the US from Europe, which almost naturally lead to a situation where there's less venture capital available for startup companies in Europe. And as a result of this, for a company like us, there are great partners in the startup community in Europe, but there are not enough of them. So if we would have a bigger population of startups in Europe to partner with, it would be better for us, and I think it would be better for Europe.
And in this list, this analysis of what needs to be done, what's the most important thing that the EU could do? I mean, if you could wave a wand and ask them to change something, what would it be to promote entrepreneurship?
Well, I think it's going to be hard to pin down one particular reason, because ultimately it's a system. And those things have to come together. It's not going to be enough to just make more capital available without addressing those other issues. It has to work together. So I think what the European Union, the Commission can do, together with the member states obviously, just look systemically, holistically at the whole system and try to improve on all these elements. Make more capital available, make it easier, in particular for small companies, to go through a mutual recognition process, benefit from common standards and a common market, and resolve and address this liability issue resulting from a failure of a startup company. And quite frankly, if you want to add an additional element, it's about an efficient exit mechanism. Because you only draw private capital into an industry if this capital can be confident that in the case of success, you can get a very decent return on your capital, which means in the case of a startup company, the investor has to be able to exit under favorable terms and conditions. In particular, in the case of a case of a public offering. And that comes with a whole host of issues to be addressed around legislation, standards, and of course taxation. And so as difficult as it may be for the Commission as well as for the respective member states, this has to be looked upon as a package.
Okay, all right. Antti, I don't know if you have any reaction to that, looking at this issue holistically. The Commission has been trying to do that for quite a while.
I think whenever standards was raised, of course, I think that we really try to make sure that I think we just adopted the kind of a standardization package where we try to make it more efficient, more, let's say, speedier, and of course, I think that then comes the question of the IPRs, and I think that being them in terms of the patents or being them in terms of copyrights, I think we are still the kind of a European Union of 27 member states, and I think that then there we are still having kind of a national kind of rules and regulations in place, and I think that's hampering definitely kind of those kind of startup companies to scale up their businesses if they are dependent on patents or kind of copyrighted content that it's not their own.
Okay. All right. Soha, I'll come to you now. Microsoft has a different perspective on this because you are one of those companies that depends on networks of small companies to get this product going in the first place.
Exactly.
So what's your perspective on this?
So just to give a little bit perspective on what I do, I run a program for Microsoft called BizSpark, which is a program that helps technology startups. We give them we give them access to our software for free. So I travel a lot in Europe to meet with these startups, to meet with the entrepreneurs and VCs and incubators. And I learn a lot from them, of course, and and a lot of issues were raised when I was talking to them. One of them is, of course, the lack of funding. Another one is labor laws, who are sometimes very rigid in certain countries that make it very hard for startups to make people come in and come out. And other difficulties like that. However, the one that, like, for me, what was really struck me the most is actually that a lot of entrepreneurs told me that they were having problems recruiting software developers, which is, for me, was really, really surprising, given that we have all these huge unemployment problems we hear about in Spain, in Italy, in Portugal, etc. So I was like, how come we have all these entrepreneurs who are willing, who want to have software developers, and actually when they find one, it's very high, the wage is too high for them and they cannot recruit them. And on the other hand, we have all these young people who have graduated from college and cannot find jobs. So basically, there's a study done by IDC that says by 2015, there will be forecasted 700,000 unfilled ICT jobs in Europe. So we have a very, very, very big problem coming. So it's a problem, but also for me, at least, it's really an opportunity because actually there's this mismatch, and if we work on this mismatch, there's a way for us, for the young people, to find them jobs, which is great. So at Microsoft...
So could I ask you,
yes.
Do you think it's a different situation in Europe than anywhere else in the world?
Well,
better, worse? I don't know.
I think in the US it's less worse, especially you have Silicon Valley, you go, the entrepreneurs that I talk to, they tell me you go and in a day you recruit your team, basically. So you have this hub where you go and you can recruit all these talents. In Europe it's much more scattered, and you have more problems getting people from one country to another, especially. We have also, some issues with foreigners coming to Europe doing this job.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, for me, Microsoft as a company, we have of course, been aware of that. So we have a program called Youth Spark, which, prepares these young people for a career in ICT. It goes through different stages from very young, and then at some age, we at the age of 19 to 24, they either choose to, become entrepreneurs, and then we have a program for that, or they choose to join the workforce, the existing workforce, and we help them by connecting them with our network partners. So for me, I love this program because I really think it makes ICT accessible. The problem here is that for a lot of these young people, programming is very abstract. They don't know what it is. This is why no one wants to go there. For that, you know what a doctor does because you went to see a doctor. You know what a lawyer does because you see them on TV. But whenever you see a programmer on TV, he's like some kind of eccentric genius who puts like a very complicated sentence on a keyboard and gets the information. So it's very, like for a lot of people, you need to be like very computer addict to be a developer, which is not the case, which is not really the case. So for me, and this is what my suggestion would be, is actually if I were to look at the future today, I would say that in the future I would like for us to teach the students programming languages, like we teach them to speak other languages, English, Spanish, etc., to teach them programming languages. In that way, we take out this myth about programming languages, and we allow them to themselves one day to say, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. I don't want to be a developer. I will recruit a developer, but at least I know what's going on in my company and the strategic decisions, I'm aware of what's going on, or either they can be recruited by startups.
So you really want a lot of people to know C++? I mean, really?
Yeah, sure. C#, actually.
Yeah, okay. Preferred, okay.
Yeah.
All right. But what can the EU institutions do specifically on this question, though, of ICT skills? I mean, education, as Antti is thinking right now, that's not the competence of the Commission. That's local. There is a DG Education, of course, but as far as the actual funding of education and curriculum, that's ultimately the member states. So, Antti, I don't know if you have any comment on this point.
Yeah, I think that DG Enterprise has been, I think, that together with their industrial associations, being, I think, that very much focused on e-skills, and I think that there has been, I think, e-skills weeks and etc. So reaching out for all different kind of stakeholders. It's also, I think, now Nelly Cruz, I think, that has been announcing that kind of a grand coalition where I think that these kind of issues, and I think that we are working very close together with DG Employment and EAC as well, so that I think there is a full recognition of this. But I think you are right. I think in the end of the question that if we are thinking about the primary, secondary, or university level education, I think the tool can be safe from our kind of instructions. But I think that, but still, of course, I think that that's kind of a very much of the question of not really legislating. It's a question of we are working together and trying to find what are the ways and means to address this. Something is related to labor market kind of issues where social partners have to find the ways that how the right type of the skills are available in the labor market. Some of them are question of what is, I think, happening at the kind of a formal educational system, which is very much in the hands of member states, and then all in between, I think, where industry, I think it has to be also because it's in their own interest that they are getting that kind of skills that they are needful.
Okay, I don't know if any of the other innovation board members from universities might want to add anything on this point. What is the role of, I mean, can the universities actually do anything on this issue of skills training? Yes.
Hi, I'm Will Cardwell from Aalto University, and some good points here. I want to go back on the ICT skills. I still think there's an organic nature to this, and I'll point to one thing we did. We invested 20,000 euros into something called Rails Girls, and it started out with, the idea was to get more young women coding, and that was, 18 months ago, and now it's on all continents and has trained thousands of young women. So with 20,000 euros, it's become...
How, with 20,000 euros? What?
Because it's the person and the people. The team that got there was charismatic, and that gets to my kind of second point is this is the role model nature of this, because around what we've noticed in our garage community is it's really, you know, it's getting people in there that can tell the stories. Like Ed said, successes and failures. We're lucky to have a couple amazing stories, Angry Birds and now Supercell. They're two of the fastest growing companies in the world right now. And they've dragged a lot of venture capital in the community, and there was nothing, almost nothing before that. So these things can happen so quickly, but we have to, recognizing the organic nature of it and how regulation and others can enable that. And if I have one question, I would ask our soon-to-be CEO, Daniela. I mean, because we've seen kind of some, let's say, momentum in the ICT space, but getting it happening in things like life sciences and others, I mean, I think it must be the same thing about getting role models involved. But I mean, what do you see as kind of the way to get that ball rolling? Because that's where can be huge societal impact.
Well, definitely people make a completely, as I was saying in the beginning, getting people with a lot of expertise helps a lot. And in our advisory board sits 6 experts from different areas, scientific, clinic, and strategic. And I'll point out that Charles Cooney, which is a founder of Genzyme and sold Genzyme to Sanofi, plays a fantastic role in advising us. And that's the kind of expertise we are hoping to get, and helps putting the snowball falling and increasing. At least I hope so. So, yeah.
Okay.
In this case, yes. If I was giving you a completely answer if I was placed in Boston, for sure, but in Portugal there is not as many of those role models in life sciences. So I hope we are one of the big hits that start the snowball effect.
Okay. Tula, you wanted to say something, and then let's take another question from the internet.
Just about this, when we talk about the role models, I mean, I think it's also important to understand that entrepreneurial mindset is also a talent. It's like music. You can have talent for music, or you can have talent for mathematics. There are people who are talented in entrepreneurial thinking, and it's a very good example. This rail girls. That there was a girl who was really enthusiastic and had the drive in her, and we picked up her, we gave her 20,000, and then all of a sudden she was all over the place. We have other initiatives like that, we have Startup Sisters now, which is similar thing that, okay, they all
Startup Sisters?
Startup Sisters, yeah. I mean, so all of a sudden, the biggest problem in Europe, how to get girls enthusiastic about IT, it's just happening, because we did identify the right people. And it's the same thing that, Silicon Valley did not it was not established because somebody decided that we need an entrepreneurial incubator, but it was because few people that had it in themselves got together and started doing it, and then it was possible to expand it. So I think that's one thing that maybe EU could help with also, is to sort of help those already existing individuals and ecosystems to grow. If that kind of a model could be somehow worked out, I think it would have enormous value for the EU as a whole.
Okay, and then of course maybe the EU could also then promote the development of some bands as well. So, all right, okay.
Absolutely. But it's a bit
from
like
the
a
internet,
band.
Marlene. And then a question from here.
Yeah.
Okay, a question from the Deputy Director of Research at Norwegian University of Life Sciences. In Norway, 89% of all firms have less than 10 employees, 39%, but provide 39% of the total economic value for industry. But the same firms only represent 8% of R&D investment by industry in Norway. And this picture is also found in other countries, as for instance in the UK, where the 50 biggest companies is responsible for over 85% of all R&D bought by industry from universities. In what way can small SME be better at collaborating with universities and research institutions in order to further for innovation and growth?
Well, okay. Would anyone care to tackle that? Yeah. I think we're all grasping fundamentally. How can are there other means by which institutions can encourage the development of SMEs? I think that's where we're going with this. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Do that.
I suppose,
you're the game one. Go ahead.
I suppose, one thing that I see starting to happen now is that, we are sort of not only attracting, startups which are starting from scratch, but we are also kind of attracting companies that are not, that should be growing but are not growing yet. And I think, but again, and it's because of this ecosystem, that it sort of pulls into it people who are interested in entrepreneurship. And then in the beginning it was pretty much student-driven startups, but now it's kind of expanding to be also other SMEs who have this kind of growth problem it's very typical to Nordic countries that you have 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 people in it, and then it stops growing because you have to cross the border of the country or something like that, which is really scary and difficult.
Okay. Other question, comment from here? Another from the internet.
I do. Failure was mentioned, but what about success? Do we celebrate success enough in Europe, according to you?
Well, I think we celebrate success. I'm more concerned about the lack of willingness to embrace failure as part of the system. Because I think that creates an emotional and quite frankly sometimes really a rational barrier towards committing the best talent to an entrepreneurial environment. And again, this is having run a startup company myself, I know how powerful that barrier can be. So I think it's less about not celebrating the successes. We're very good at celebrating successes, rightfully so, but I think there's a tendency to look at failure as something what should be almost avoided. And this doesn't make any sense in the concept of startup companies, where the system only works if from 100 startup companies you really very quickly down select to, let's say, 10 which have the best offerings, the best prospects, the best value proposition, because otherwise you're deploying capital not in the most efficient way. So this down selection, which inevitably means failure of a fairly significant number of the population, has to be part of the system and actually has to be embraced. And from a business culture perspective and from a legal environment, both of those elements have to be supportive of actually sometimes fostering deliberately earlier failure so that available resources, available capital can be concentrated on the most promising companies.
Daniela, are you afraid of failing?
Of course.
What do you do about it?
Of course I am. I'm afraid. I don't want to fail. But if I do, I think I can learn more from failure than from success, for sure.
Oh, that's a textbook answer.
But I do not agree with, I don't think we celebrate success enough.
How should it be done? How to celebrate success?
I was taught that in a startup company, you will have plenty of failures, at least small failures. But you always want to celebrate each milestone. And that's something we sometimes have trouble at Cell2B. So whenever we have a tiny success, or if we have a tiny failure, we are all depressed. If we have a tiny success, we will celebrate, where we need to stop. And I always say that to the team. We need to stop and celebrate it, really feel it. That's a reason to do it. And I don't think we do that enough. And especially, we do not pick star companies in countries or in Europe and really market those companies. In the US, they are much more efficient in marketing star companies than we are. And I think Finland has great successes. You should market it a lot more than you do and create a snowball effect
Okay. All right. Another question from the internet.
A more technical question.
Okay.
From Initz in Austria. Can non-profit incubator make use of programs like COSME and Horizon 2020 to channel money to startups?
That's a bit tricky question. I think that I cannot say that for sure, but I think that if the person is in contact via email, of course, I think we will try to find their answer to that question.
This is ultimately in the rules of participation for the
Exactly,
program.
yes. Yeah.
So for that question, could the person who wrote that email us and we can send it to you and get an answer back on that. We're just about finished with this part of the section. Is there one more comment or question from here? Yes.
Larry Moffat with the European Young Innovators Forum. I wanted to address the point that Soa made about the difficulty of hiring ICT talent. And I think part of the problem is that, of course, big companies are competing for that talent. And we can blame labor laws that make it difficult for startups to hire someone. And maybe the lack of entrepreneurial drive by young people who would rather go and work for GE or Microsoft. But I think it's also the fact that the reward is less than it might be in the US. The risk is high, the risk that the startup will fail, but the capital is not there as the encouragement to make it worthwhile for someone to take that risk. So I agree with the gentleman from GE that we need a systemic way of looking at this and addressing all of these problems.
Okay, any comment on that? No. Okay, I think it was a self-answering comment. Thank you very much for that. Before we close this session, I just wanted to read to you one quote. Malcolm is not with us right now, but one of his colleagues, Jürgen Kreutzmann, in the European Parliament, told us so a couple of months ago in an interview. He says, we have 23 million unemployed in Europe. This was a few months ago. It's higher now. But we have 23 million unemployed in Europe, and we have 23 million SMEs. This means, only in theory, of course, that if every SME would create one job, we will have solved the problem. So with that kind of math, I wish good luck to Antti and your colleagues in the Commission in the negotiations over your coming budget. So thank you very much. Thank you all. Now, at this point, I'd like to hand over the floor to Edward Astle. He is the Pro-Rector of Enterprise for Imperial College. And also, Bob, could you join us in Malcolm's seat? Bob Sorrell, Vice President of Public Partnerships at BP Technology. Yes, please go to the podium. We are, I should say, by introduction, the Science Business Innovation Board is an organization of, not-for-profit organization, of universities and companies that are trying to improve the climate for innovation in Europe. And we have been watching very closely, our members have, the budget debates in Brussels that are getting more and more complicated. So, Edward, over to you.
Well, thank you, Richard. Hello, everybody. I feel somewhat, what's the word, embarrassed following such a distinguished panel and such a lengthy conversation. However, on behalf of the Innovation Board, which is both major businesses here in Europe and major universities, I was asked just to summarise for you a public statement, which we have had absolutely no difficulty in agreeing and which will be issued at some stage that you can tell us all about at the end, Richard. And this is actually to come out, as many other people have been doing, in very explicit support of the Horizon 2020 programme, and indeed of the 80 billion euro proposal that underpins that programme. And in the statement that you will see in due course, we've actually chosen to focus on 4 reasons why we think this is so critical for Europe's future. And there'll be others, but these are just 4 that we have coalesced around as being the most important. The first is easily obvious to all of us, and it's simply that the evidence from everywhere shows that you have to maintain investment in research and development to sustain economic growth. Every academic institution has done, of any note interested in this field, has done research which proves it, not only Imperial College. Every business intuitively knows it. Many startups know it. There's one statistic I could quote to you, which is that for every 1% increase in public R&D funding, there's an increase of 0.17% of productivity in a national economy. That increase in productivity is higher from public R&D than it is from private R&D. But actually the evidence is there before us with the internet, with the basic research into DNA, actually with every company represented on the panel today, the origins of GE around the technological revolution of electricity, Microsoft and the personal computer. I think you'd have to admit, Daniela, that basic research underpins what you're looking at with your amazing breakthroughs in cell therapy. So the evidence is there for all of us about the economic impact of both basic and applied research. There's a second thing which the evidence tells us about very clearly, which is that if you don't sustain that investment over the long term, you'll do irreparable damage to its underlying infrastructure. So how Europe has got off the ground in a magnificent way. How could we now pull back and then degrade that growing and all-important infrastructure in R&D, in basic and applied research, in innovation, which then leads on to all the entrepreneurship that we've been hearing about today. The third reason is a sort of much higher level one, which is that if we look at the world economy and the competition in that world economy, we'll all know that the US and China are investing hugely in R&D. Where does Europe's competitive advantage lie in the long term? It's actually in the knowledge-based economy, in the talent and knowledge-based economy. So again, we've got to acknowledge that top-level reason for supporting this basic infrastructure. And Horizon 2020 is a fantastic package of ways of doing that. Final reason is a pragmatic one. And that is there's clearly already evidence that it's working, that the expenditure to date, which both national governments in Europe and the European Commission have been putting into R&D infrastructure, is working. In basic research, we have the success of the European Research Council. In basic and applied research, the successful collaborations, including business and universities across Europe, of many framework programs. There is the EIT and the knowledge and innovation communities. There is the evidence of entrepreneur activity, much of which we've been hearing about today. So those are the four reasons which we've highlighted as an innovation board, and which we'll be summarising in what's only one page of a statement that you'll tell us a bit more about, Richard.
Thank you very much. This statement, as you say, is one page. Everybody's busy, can't read more than a page. We're trying to make the point. It will be published tonight online on Science Business. We are going to begin a campaign of trying to look for like-minded companies and universities that would also like to join us in this statement. We will spend the next 2 months gathering support in this way. If you have interest in this, please contact me, and don't be surprised if we contact you along the way. This is, I think, a very important moment right now in Brussels for the future of EU R&D and innovation policy. But I've also, however, asked Bob Sorrell to join us. BP is also a member of the Innovation Board. And Bob, it's kind of a non-obvious, well, it's an obvious question, but perhaps a non-obvious answer. Why would a major multinational care about what's going on in EU R&D funding? We know why, pardon me, Edward, we know why Imperial cares. Not a small part of your budget comes from EU funding in the end, but that's not the case in BP, so why?
So, I mean, I think for BP, if you look in the energy industry as a whole, the challenges that we're facing right now are absolutely enormous, and it's not unique to our sector. Every sector, you can see there's very large challenges, and at the heart of those challenges lie technology. And at the heart of the solution to those technologies rely investment in the science base, actually in the UK, in Europe, to address those challenges. So actually, you know, the EU budget and in continual investment in EU programs absolutely critical to addressing those challenges. And if you look at the scale of the challenges, there's a real need for the EU to really invest very wisely in this area. Because the scale, even for large companies like my own, is so large that no single company can really afford to address it. And so there's a real need for the EU, in my mind, to do some things in a couple of key areas. First of all, invest in the infrastructure to get a lot of these changes to occur. Not unique to energy, common across multiple sectors. The second thing I think that's very wise for the EU to do is to invest at scale. Yeah? And by that I mean there's experiments that you can do. Again, if I come back to the energy sector, if you do something in carbon capture and storage, or if you do something in generation for nuclear, the cost of that is of the order of billions of dollars. And so therefore, you know, the EU is in a position to actually fund those types of activities at the EU scale. And that's where they can really make a difference. And the other thing that's come up a lot when I listen to the panel is this issue around regulation. And as well, you know, if you look in again, I'll give you an energy example of car charging standards. Yeah, the simple thing of, you know, charging up an electric vehicle. The last time I looked about 18 months ago, there were 94 different standards for how you plug a vehicle into a charging point. Well, clearly that's insane. And so therefore you need to move to standards that actually help to drive the kind of technology so they can operate across multiple borders. I think the other thing that's important is to think about the different sectors as well. And so for a company like ours, having a relationship with the EU and understanding the different clock speeds that operate for our industry versus other industry sectors is really critical. Because in our industry, you're talking about decadal timescales between taking technology from the bench and taking it out into the marketplace. And so this is a long-term game, and it requires long-term investment. And different sectors have very different drivers for innovation. And in fact, you know, we're doing some work on this in the UK context actually to have a look at that. And we've looked at 4 different industry sectors to begin to understand this in greater detail. Because we also believe there's a lot to learn from understanding other industry sectors. So this whole investment in the EU is really important. It comes at a critical time where the EU can really make a difference in investing in major activities, the big experiments we need to prove in some of these sectors, and actually putting the infrastructure and regulations in place to support it. And you know, only the EU or something of that scale has really kind of scale to make a significant difference in such a complex area.
Okay. Other comments? Would any of you like to jump in on this? Or any other members?
Perhaps one additional comment, Bob is right on the money, but it's not only investing into the R&D infrastructure, really in particular in the energy space, we also have to give startup companies and new technologies a system through which they can scale. Because as you pointed out, the energy industry is an industry where the lifetime of assets is measured in decades, and the upfront investment just to get a pilot started is significant. And this is where, as I've said, companies like GE come into play, because we can offer a platform for selected startup companies through which they can scale. We have done this, we do this quite successfully, but certainly others perhaps could join us to make this more an industry-wide approach, because as you pointed out, we certainly need more information to scale faster in the energy space.
Okay. Any last comment from anyone? Okay. Well, with this, we will stop now. I'd like to thank our friends on the internet for joining us with this. We will be publishing tonight. I said we'll be publishing the statement from the board and providing more information about what you can do to help propel it. Tomorrow we will publish an account of this event, and we welcome your feedback on both the event and on what else we could do to promote innovation in Europe. Thank you very much to all, and Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much again for hosting us. I believe, by the way, for those of you who are here in reality rather than virtually, there are drinks, etc., just outside there.